Book 2, Chapter 7 of British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Lynn Thompson. British Goblins, Welsh Folklore, Fairy Mythology, Legends and Traditions by Wirt Sikes, Book 2. Chapter 7, Part 1. There are death portents in every country, and in endless variety. In Wales these portents assume distinct and striking individualities, in great number and with clearly defined attributes. The Banshee, according to Mr. Baring Gould, has no corresponding feature in Scandinavian, Teutonic, or classic mythology, and belongs entirely to the Celts. The Welsh have the Banshee in its most blood-curdling form under the name of Gwach y Rhibyn. They also have the Cyhyraeth, which is never seen, but is heard, moaning dolefully and dreadfully in the night. The Toleth, also only heard, not groaning but imitating some earthly sound, such as sawing, singing, or the tramping of feet. The Cwn Annwn and the Cwnewber, dogs of hell and dogs of the sky. The Canol Corff, or corpse candle. The Tulw, or goblin funeral, and many others, all of them death portents. These, as the more important and striking, I will describe further, but there are several others which must first be mentioned. The Adran y Corff is a bird which chirps at the door of the person who is about to die, and makes a noise that sounds like the Welsh word for come, come, the summons to death. In ancient tradition it had no feathers nor wings, soaring without support high in the heavens, and when not engaged upon some earthly message, dwelling in the land of illusion and fantasy. This corpse bird may properly be associated with superstition regarding the screech owl, whose cry near a sick-bed inevitably portends death. The untimely crowing of a cock also foretells the sudden demise of some member of the family. In North Wales the cry of the golden plover is a death omen. These birds are called in this connection the whistlers. The same superstition prevails in Warwickshire, and the sound is called the seven whistlers. Thunder and lightning in midwinter announce the death of the great man of the parish. This superstition is thought to be peculiar to Wales, or to the wilder and more secluded parts of North Wales. Also deemed peculiar to Wales is the Tanwedd, a fiery apparition which falls on the lands of a freeholder who is about to die. It is described as appearing somewhat similar to falling stars, but slower of motion. It lighteneth all the air and ground where it passeth, says the honest Welshman, Mr. Davis, in a letter to Mr. Baxter, adding, lasteth 3 or 4 miles or more, for aught is known, because no man seeth the rising or beginning of it, and when it falls to the ground, it sparkleth and lighteth all about. It also comes as a duty-performing goblin after a death, haunting the graveyard, and calling attention to some special grave by its conduct, as in the following account. Walter Watkins of the Neuadd, in a parish of Brecknockshire, was going one dark night toward Tafbeckan Chapel, not far from his house, when he saw a light near the chapel. It increased till it was as big as a church tower, and decreased again till it was as small as a star. Then enlarged again, and decreased as before, and this it did several times. He went to his house and fetched his father and mother to see it, and they all saw it plainly, much to their astonishment and wonder. Some time after this, as a neighbour was ploughing in a field near the chapel, about where the mysterious light had been seen, the plough struck against a large flat stone. This the ploughman raised up, after a deal of difficulty, and under it he found a stone chest, in which was the jawbone of a man, and naught else except an earthen jug. The bone was supposed to be the remains of a man who had disappeared long before, and whose wife had since married, and on her being told of it, she fell ill and died. The light, which had often been seen before by various persons, was after this seen no more. It was believed to be the spirit of the murdered man, appearing as a light. Listening at the church door in the dark, to hear shouted by a ghostly voice in the deserted edifice the names of those who are shortly to be buried in the adjoining churchyard, is a Hallowe'en custom in some parts of Wales. In other parts the window serves the same purpose. There are said to be still extant outside some village churches steps which were constructed in order to enable the superstitious peasantry to climb to the window to listen. The principle of expectant attention, so well known to physiological science, would be likely in this case to act with special force as a ghost-raiser. In an ancient manuscript by Llewellyn Sion of Llangewid, there is mention of a frightful monster called the Fad Felon, which was seen through the keyhole of Ross Church by Malgan Gwynedd, who died in consequence. This monster was predicted in a poem by Taliesin as a strange creature which should come from the sea marsh, with hair and teeth and eyes like gold. The yellow fever plague which raged in Wales during some 5 years in the 6th century is the monster referred to in this legend. The Scotch wraith and Irish fetch have their parallel in Wales, and the Lledrith, or spectre of a person seen before his death. It never speaks, and vanishes if spoken to. It has been seen by miners previous to a fatal accident in the mine. The story is told of a miner who saw himself lying dead and horribly maimed in a phantom tramcar, led by a phantom horse, and surrounded by phantom miners. As he watched this dreadful group of spectres they passed on, looking neither to the right nor the left, and faded away. The miner's dog was as frightened as its master at the sight, and ran howling into the darkness. Though deeming himself doomed, the miner continued to work in the pit, and as the days passed on and no harm came to him, he grew more cheerful, and was so bold as to laugh at the superstition. The day he did this, a stone fell from the roof and broke his arm. As soon as he recovered he resumed work in the pit. His death followed instantly. A stone crushed him, and he was borne maimed and dead in the tram along the road where his Lledrith had appeared, a mile below the play of sunshine and wave of trees. The Maddli Nos, or night fiend, is a death omen mentioned by the Rev. D. R. Thomas in the Archaeologia Cambrensis, and Croker gives the Welsh parallel of the Irish death coach, a spectre called Ceffyl heb an pen, or the headless horse. The Marw Coel, or yellow spot before death, is another death omen which I have been able to trace no further than the pages where I find it. Part II. A frightful figure among Welsh apparitions is the Gwrach y Rhibyn, whose crowning distinction is its prodigious ugliness. The feminine pronoun is generally used in speaking of this goblin, which, unlike the majority of its kind, is supposed to be a female. A Welsh saying regarding one of her sex who is the reverse of lovely is, "Y mae mor sulla a Gwrach y Rhibyn." She is as ugly as the Gwrach y Rhibyn. The spectre is a hideous being, with dishevelled hair, long black teeth, long lank withered arms, leathern wings, and a cadaverous appearance. In the stillness of night it comes and flaps its wings against the window, uttering at the same time a blood-curdling howl, and calling by name on the person who is to die, in a lengthened dying tone, as thus: Davy! Diw! Bach! The effect of its shriek or howl is indescribably terrific, and its sight blasting to the eyes of the beholder. It is always an omen of death, though its warning cry is heard under varying circumstances. Sometimes it appears in the mist on the mountain-side or at cross-roads, or by a piece of water which it splashes with its hands. The gender of apparitions is no doubt as a rule the neuter, but the Gwrach y Rhibyn defies all rules by being a female which at times sees fit to be a male. In its female character it has a trick of crying at intervals in a most doleful tone, "Oh, oh, fy nwgr, my husband, my husband." But when it chooses to be a male, this cry is changed to "Fy nwgreg, my wife," or 5 Lentin Bach, my child, my little child. There is a frightful story of a dissipated peasant who met this goblin on the road one night, and thought it was a living woman. He therefore made wicked and improper overtures to it, with the result of having his soul nearly frightened out of his body in the horror of discovering his mistake. As he emphatically exclaimed, "Och du, it was a Gwrach-y Rhibyn, and not a woman at all." Part 3. The Gwrach-y Rhibyn recently appeared, according to an account given me by a person who claimed to have seen it, at Llandaff. Surely no more probable site for the appearance of a spectre so ancient of lineage could be found, than that ancient cathedral city where some say was the earliest Christian fane in Great Britain, and which was certainly the seat of the earliest Christian bishopric. My narrator was a respectable looking man of the peasant farmer class, who I met in one of my walks near Cardiff, in the summer of 1878. It was at Llandaff, he said to me, on the 14th of last November, when I was on a visit to an old friend, that I saw and heard the Gwrach-y Rhibyn. I was sleeping in my bed, and was woke at midnight by a frightful screeching and a shaking of my window. It was a loud and clear screech, and the shaking of the window was very plain, but it seemed to go by like the wind. I was not so much frightened, sir, as you may think. Excited I was, that's the word, excited. And I jumped out of bed and rushed to the window and flung it open. Then I saw the Gwrach-y Rhibyn, saw her plainly, sir, a horrible old woman with long red hair and a face like chalk, with great teeth like tusks, looking back over her shoulder at me as she went through the air, with a long black gown trailing along the ground below her arms. For body I could make out none. She gave another unearthly screech while I looked at her. Then I heard her flapping her wings against the window of a house just below the one I was in, and she vanished from my sight, but I kept on staring into the darkness. And as I am a living man, sir, I saw her go in at the door of the Cow and Snuffers Inn, and return no more. I watched the door of the inn a long time, but she did not come out. The next day, it's the honest truth I'm telling you, they told me the man who kept the Cow and Snuffers Inn was dead, had died in the night. His name was Llewellyn, sir. You can ask any one about him, at Llandaff. He had kept the inn there for 70 years, and his family before him for 300 years, just at that very spot. It's not these new families that the Gwrach-y Rhibyn ever troubles, sir. It's the old stock. Part 4. The close resemblance of this goblin to the Irish banshee, or benshee, will be at once perceived. The same superstition is found among other peoples of Celtic origin. Sir Walter Scott mentions it among the Highlands of Scotland. It is not traced among other than Celtic peoples distinctly, but its association with the primeval mythology is doubtless to be found in the same direction with many other death omens, to wit, the path of the wind god Hermes. The frightful ugliness of the Gwrach-y Rhibyn is a consistent feature of the superstition, in both its forms. It recalls the black maiden who came to Caerleon and liberated Peredur. Blacker were her face and her 2 hands than the blackest iron covered with pitch, and her hue was not more frightful than her form. High cheeks had she, and a face lengthened downwards, and a short nose with distended nostrils, and one eye was of a piercing mottled grey, and the other was as black as jet, deep sunk in her head, and her teeth were long and yellow, more yellow were they than the flower of the broom, and her stomach rose from the breastbone higher than her chin, and her back was in the shape of a crook, and her legs were large and bony, and her figure was very thin and spare, except her feet and legs, which were of huge size. The Welsh word gwrach means a hag or witch, and it has been fancied that there is a connection between this word and the mythical Avagddu, whose wife the Gwrach was. The Gwrach-y Rhibyn appears also as a river spectre in Glamorganshire. Part 5. A death portent which is often confused with the Gwrach-y Rhibyn, yet which is rendered quite distinct by its special attributes, is the Cyhyraeth. This is a groaning spirit. It is never seen, but the noise it makes is no less terrible to the ear than the appearance of its visible sister is to the eye. Among groaning spirits it is considered to be the chief. The Prophet Jones succinctly characterizes it as a doleful, dreadful noise in the night, before a burying. David Prosser, of Llanybither parish, a sober, sensible man, and careful to tell the truth, once heard the cyhyraeth in the early part of the night, his wife and maidservant being together in the house, and also hearing it, and when it came opposite the window, it pronounced these strange words of no signification that we know of, that is, Wulach, Wulach. Some time afterwards a funeral passed that way. The judicious Joshua Coslet, who lived by the river Towy in Carmarthenshire, testified that the cyhyraeth is often heard there, and that it is a doleful, disagreeable sound, heard before the deaths of many, and most apt to be heard before foul weather. The voice resembles the groaning of sick persons who are to die, heard at first at a distance, then comes nearer, and the last near at hand, so that it is a threefold warning of death. It begins strong, and louder than a sick man can make. The second cry is lower, but not less doleful, but rather more so. The third yet lower and soft, like the groaning of a sick man almost spent and dying. A person well remembering the voice, and coming to the sick man's bed, shall hear his groans exactly like those which he had before heard from the cyhyraeth. This crying spirit especially affected the 12 parishes in the 100 of Inissenin, which lie on the south-east side of the river Towy, where some time past it groaned before the death of every person who lived that side of the country. It also sounded before the death of persons who were born in these parishes, but died elsewhere. Sometimes the voice is heard long before death, but no longer than 3/4 of a year. So common was it in the district named, that among the people there was a familiar form of reproach to any one making a disagreeable noise, or children crying or groaning unreasonable, was to ejaculate, "O'r cyhyraeth." The reason why the cyhyraeth was more often heard in the 100 of Inissenin was thought to be that Non, the mother of St. David, lived in those parts, where a village is called after her name, Llannon, the church of Non. On the southern sea coast, in Glamorganshire, the cyhyraeth is sometimes heard by the people in the villages on shore passing down the channel with loud moans, while those dismal lights which forebode a wreck are seen playing along the waves. Watchers by the seashore have also heard its moan, far out on the ocean, gradually drawing nearer and nearer, and then dying away. And when they thought it gone, it has suddenly shrieked close to their startled ears, chilling their very marrows. Then, long after, they would hear it, now faint, now loud, going along the sands into the distant darkness. One or more corpses were usually washed ashore soon after. In the villages the cyhyraeth is heard passing through the empty streets and lanes by night, groaning dismally, sometimes rattling the window shutters or flinging open the doors, as it flits by. When going along the country lanes it will thus horrify the inmates of every house it passes. Some old people say it is only heard before the death of such as are of strayed mind, or who have long been ill, but it always comes when an epidemic is about to visit the neighbourhood. A tradition of the cyhyraeth is connected with the parish churchyard at St. Mellons, a quaint, old-fashioned village within easy tramping distance of Cardiff, but in Monmouthshire. It is of a boy who was sent on an errand, and who heard the cyhyraeth crying in the churchyard, first in one place, then in another, and finally in a third place, where it rested. Some time after, a corpse was brought to that churchyard to be buried, but some person came and claimed the grave. They went to another place, but that also was claimed. Then they went to a third place, and there they were allowed to bury their dead in peace. And this going about with the corpse was just the same as the boy declared it. Of course the boy could not know what was to come to pass, but this crying spirit knew exactly what would come to pass. I was also told by a person at St. Mellons that a ghost had been seen sitting upon the old stone cross which stands on the hillside near the church. 6. Other groaning spirits are sometimes heard. A girl named Mary Morgan, living near Crumlyn Bridge, while standing on the bridge one evening, was seized with mortal terror on hearing a groaning voice going up the river, uttering the words, "O du beth anwana fi," "O God, what shall I do?" many times repeated, amid direful groans. The conclusion of this narration is a hopeless mystery, as Mary fainted away with her fright. Much more satisfactory, as a ghost story with a moral, is the tale of the groaning spirit of Bedwellty. There was one night a wake at the house of Meredith Thomas, over the body of his 4-year-old child, at which 2 profane men, named Thomas Edward Morgan and Anthony Aaron, began playing at cards, and swearing most horribly. In the parish of Bedwellty the wakes, or watch nights, as they are more commonly called in Wales, were at that time very profanely kept. Few beside the dissenters, said Jones, who was himself a dissenter, it must be remembered, had the sense and courage to forbid this wickedness, but suffered it as a custom, because the pretence was to divert the relations of the dead, and lessen their sorrows. While the aforementioned profane men were playing cards and swearing, suddenly a dismal groaning noise was heard at the window. At this the company was much frightened, excepting the card players, who said "Pooh!" and went on playing. But to pacify the rest of the company they finally desisted, and at once the groaning ceased. Soon after they began playing again, when at once the groaning set up in most lamentable tones, so that people shuddered. But the profane men again said "Pooh! It is some fellow playing tricks to frighten us." "No," said William Harry Rees, a good man of the Baptist persuasion, "it is no human being there groaning, but a spirit." And again he desired them to give over. But though they were so bold with their card playing, these wicked men had not the hardihood to venture out and see who it was playing tricks, as they called it. However, one of the company said, "I will go and take the dogs with me, and see if there be any human being there." The groaning still continued. This bold person then took the prime staff, and began to call the dogs to go with him. But the dogs could not be induced to go out, being in great terror at the groaning noise, and sought to hide themselves under the stools and about the people's feet. In vain they beat the dogs, and kicked and scolded them, out doors they would not go. This at last convinced the profane men, and they left off playing, for fear the devil should come among them. For it was told in other places that people had played cards till his sulphurous majesty appeared in person. End of Book 2, Chapter 7.